Well, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining my call today, my presentation today. And uh, this, the, I'm finally glad to present this topic. I know we've been planning to present this in March in Orlando, but took us extra few months to get this rolling. But I'm glad to be here. So I know Beth gave a little bit of a background, but this is me, how I look like. And I'm currently working remotely from Cary, North Carolina, like many of you working from home. And my main interest is applying my background in technology, recently focused on machine learning in pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical data science. So, although there are many applications of machine learning, and there are specific data types and contents that we use in pharma, makes it difficult to apply um, ML directly. So you have to have the real metadata knowledge in the pharmaceutical data to apply that. Also, my interests include interactive visualization and analysis. So these include such as dynamic table listing figure generation using tools like RShiny. Um, Also, another topic on is the open source in pharma. We are very protective when it comes to our sharing our knowledge and technology, but obviously we do use much of the open source software, and I would like to see the possibility of contributing and sharing the knowledge and technology back to the community from our industry. So that's a little bit about me, and some disclaimers before I start. Of course, it's my opinion and thoughts, it, much in the presentation, not necessarily from my employers. Um, Also, this is my side project, and my main role is, of course, lies with the PK/PD and clinical pharmacology support. So we've myself and my colleagues worked on this project as sort of like pet project for the last few months, and that's where it began. That's where it sort of stopped at this point, and it is also proof of concept. So much of the ideas and thoughts in the project is still, I believe, is preliminary, but it has much to develop, and it is a work in progress. But it's refreshing to see FDA Infuse is open for new ideas, and I think what I quote is using your imagination and do something unexpected. So we try to do something unexpected, and of course it's open for lots of validation and scrutiny. So and in the when if this project continues and it becomes somewhat viable, I like to make it open source, and I will discuss that why more on this later. And this presentation also, I would cover much of general topics because it covers many topics in our industry, not only technical areas, but such as real world data, machine learnings, and I would just assume that many of you don't have much experience in that, and of course I won't be able to have much time to dig in detail, but of course I'll be available later on to answer any questions you have. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about our data. So we spend many hours and resources collecting, transforming, projecting, and joining, reconstructing toward the end to make the sense out of data we collect. So, is there any way better to do this? Is there any Others, are we naturally designed to look at data just as rows and columns and um, variables and observations? Those of you who are familiar with the stats. Um, we it began as trying to change how we conceptualize objects instead of our common relational databases. So when we try to objectify what we have in terms of the data in the real world, we try something different, such as this. This is what we call graph and network, and it helps you to look at again the data in more objective way. So one particular example I give you here is how the politics in Washington is connected with lobbyists and contributions and client, state, legislator, bill issue. So, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with design of graph, but I'm not sure how you're familiar with mapping this data into actual graphical objects in, in databases. And graph data really helps with the performance. It helps you to, it really index free. It's got the index free property because each vertex maintains information about its neighbors and is always constant in respect to the data size. And also, you can update data in real time, support queries simultaneously. So it's got a lot of advantage over a traditional relational database. But since we don't take that advantage much in our normal day-to-day data work. So a little bit about real-world data evidences. These are derived from real-world medical settings. So these include electronic medical records, health records, claims databases, health surveys, patient registries, and even social media. So we have all these real-world data out there, the data from the real world that is collected and packaged and available for your records. And they are de-identified for obvious reasons, for privacy, and stored in a variety of sources and can be analyzed. Of course, the only one limitation is observational. Since the database is observational and can only evaluate the association, not necessarily the causality. And these can revitalize, some of the uses of this data, we can revitalize interrupted trials, can reuse products for different targets. So we may notice that some of the drugs that are out there that were intended for something, but we've actually found that it's effective for something else. We can create artificial control groups. Can also support and enhance randomized trials. And I believe this is one of the initiatives that FDA is working on to use the real-world evidence to support the normal randomized clinical trials. So one particular database that I used here is called the MDV, Medical Data Vision Database, and it's health claims and administrative and diagnosis procedure combination data from 300 Japanese hospitals. The reason that I use Japanese database is that I've been working with my Japanese colleagues for the last couple of years on applying real-world data with the machine learning. So I was more familiar with it, but this can be expanded to other databases such as Optium or other the databases available in the US. It covers over 30 million patients and 1.7 billion records of disease, and 9.3 billion records of DPC, the diagnosis procedure combination data. So it's a big data. Obviously, we couldn't use all the data to do this, but we had to use a subset, and very small subset, as you will see. So the proposed solution is to investigate the drug interactions with this data using the graph structure and machine learning algorithm. That was the proposed solution. So we convert this traditional data into graph database or graph structure in this case. I didn't necessarily use the graph DB such as Neo4j, but just the structure as this is a proof of concept. And we map drugs as nodes, as vertices, and patients as edges. So it forms the relationship between drugs using the patient's information, patient attributes such as sex, age, activity dates, and such. And we try to visualize this drug-focused graph structure. More edges between two nodes means more patients are using the drugs for certain conditions. And each edge, if you think about it, is forming between two drugs. Is the basis of a drug interaction by definition. And for each node, we have common occurrences that cause the drug treatment for each neighboring drug nodes. So we can assume that all edges connecting to node is control, except for each neighboring node which is treated. So when you have the connecting edges that are used to treat certain conditions, if you see some other effect of that treatment, and you eliminate the primary target or primary treatment, you can possibly identify what the side effects or the interactions that are occurring between those two drugs when you take those two drugs. So we use the propensity score matching to eliminate the bias and identify the control groups, and identification of outcome event possibly caused by DDI. So a little bit about propensity score matching is elimination of sample bias for observational studies. So it's a statistical technique so that we try to estimate the effects of a treatment by accounting for covariates that predicting receiving the treatment. So we are trying to reduce the bias due to the confounding variables from the covariates, and we try to identify that treatment's effect. And that's actually a definition from Wikipedia. So here's a visual explanation of what it will make look like. I thought it might be easier to show you that, but this is basically what I just talked about. So what does it really look like when you try to visualize this? You see something like this. You see that small clusters of patients and drugs, and you see one extra one right here. Probably is an isolated case. And this is when you have one patient and trying to analyze the patient's drug and the activity in treatment, the situation. So the first one, we use the normal plotting, and we have a 9 nodes, so which are drugs, and 583 edges connecting them by disease, different dates, and such. And this was done with R and Python. And this is exactly the same. We just used a different visualization technique. We used this network, and you see a big cluster on the right side, and you see a sort of single isolated case on the left. It's not connecting to anything. So we're going to go a little further. We're going to do more than a single patient with 10 patients. Then you start to see this, and you don't see edges because it's just there are too many to visualize. There are 49 nodes, drugs, and 1,044 edges connecting them by disease and different dates. And you see that probably the small chunks are possibly the disease related or condition related. Again, this is visualization using a different technique, but it's identical to what you see in the previous slide. Now we wanted to push the limit. Up to that point with the 10 patients wasn't too bad, but we found that with 50 patients, it started to slow down because I was using my personal laptop, and my laptop is not so powerful. But with the 20 patients, we start to see this. And at this time, we have 259 nodes, drugs, and there are 60,050 edges connecting them. So this is the point that even though you don't see all the edges here, to really pushing that limit to visualize on a laptop machine. And this is again similar to the previous slide. It's actually exactly the same data, but using the different technique. Okay, so what's the next steps then? The real work begins where we like to use the more computing power if possible. Using high performance computing or the GPU would be a good start. And also, even though I didn't get to use it this time, I like to use GraphDB, such as Neo4j. And possibly we could use some smarter algorithms to minimize the real-time computation for visual. So basically, what we try to visualize in real time was slowing the hardware down considerably. So I like to try that in a different approach, which can possibly minimize that computation requirements. And another thing we could try is targeting the population, such as diabetic types, or JAK inhibitors, or COVID-19, very active yet unknown clinical outcomes. So this is something that will be a good target candidate. We don't have the randomized trial data yet, but the real-world data is starting to become available. And use machine learning to find the optimal drug regimen or the cluster by identifying positive, negative DDIs, so drug interactions. So in your future, we like to use the reinforcement learning using the bot, and in the far down the future, we like to use what we call federated learning. And I like to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But just to cover some of the machine learning aspect of it, we are trying to, there are many different types of machine learning: supervised, unsupervised, reinforcement learnings, and generative adversarial network and such. Probably you're familiar with the supervised learning, where we have the training data set with the result already known. And unsupervised, of course, we don't have the known result. We try to find the clusters of the unknown outcomes. So the reinforcement learning is where we keep feeding back the reward and penalty system into the bot to try the optimized, trying to find the optimal solution. So in this case, we're trying to find what would be the optimal drug regimen between these networks to find the most ideal dose and the possibly delivery of the drug to the patient to treat certain condition. So a little bit about reinforcement learning, and try to kind of show you how the system works. We have an agent given such actions in an environment, give the reward and a penalty, and loop back to the agent and continue that until it learns most optimal solution. And this is actually a clip from YouTube from a company called DeepMind. They're famous for developing a computer a couple of years ago that beat human gold champion in the world. And that is one very pinnacle example of reinforcement learning. So I thought you might be interested in looking at it. Uh, So I'll share that with you, what it looks like. So all the bot really knows is that by performing the action, it's trying to get the reward, which is a score, and it's trying to learn what would be the most efficient way to gain that reward. Now, only after this is very simplified learning, of course. After 120 minutes, it starts to play like an expert, really, because it has found what would be the best way to play this game. Now it's coming up with something that maybe many humans couldn't think about. It finds that digging a tunnel behind the block is the most efficient way of performing this because, of course, bouncing back and forth in the back minimize your action. So if you're interested, it's available on YouTube. Okay, and the further down the line, what we try to do is called federated learning. It's simply sharing of the smart models between entities, between companies in this case. So, but we are not sharing any data. It has a distributed models, and it can accommodate different models and diversity of data. And of course, because it's distributed among different nodes, it lowers the computation requirements and lowers the storage, and with a high latency is acceptable. And the most importantly, I think in our industry, is the privacy. Your data never leaves the individual organization, but only the models gets aggregated and randomized by underlying protocol. So your organization will download the current model from the cloud or one source. Your computer resource will improve it by learning from the local data, summarizes the changes in a small update, push it back to the cloud, and the update gets averaged with other updates to improve the model. So this is what we call federated learning. Okay, I'd like to acknowledge the following people. My programming team in our group: Darren, Michaela, and David. And there were two advisories from our statistic department, Shintaro and Mike, and my supervisor, Stuart Pierce. And these are the references that were used to develop and give the presentation. I believe I'm very close to the my limit, 927. Okay, so thank you. And